Hey everyone, you're listening to the Vint podcast, your source for market insights, wine industry news, and updates on our current collections. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint podcast. My name is Brady, and as always, I'm joined by Billy, and we have someone else in the room today, well, virtually in the room. Our new director of wine, Adam Lapierre, is joining us on the call today, and we're really excited to introduce Adam. He brings a lot to our team. We'll let him introduce himself a little bit more as we get into this episode, but we have a great June shaping up on the Vint platform. We have a lot of awesome collections that we're about to announce shortly. Around the time that this episode launches, there should be a little bit more information out into our community about our upcoming collections, but certainly stay tuned to that. We had our best month ever in terms of collection sellouts and total dollar amount sold last month, which is really great for us as a business and excellent for our investors as well as we continue to roll out new and unique collections. Certainly Adam will help us to continue to do that on a more regular basis and with hopefully better pricing and better potential returns for our investors in the long run. So Adam, do you want to just give kind of a high level overview of how you got involved with Vint early on, especially as an advisor and now full-time on our team?
Definitely. Happy to be here, Brady and Billy, and really excited to be joining the Vint team full-time. I actually was introduced to Nick a little over a year ago, Nick King, the CEO, and we had some discussions about my background and what Vint was trying to do, the vision for Vint. And Nick asked me to join as an advisor on the wine committee, helping the team to identify collection concepts, to source wines, and then just to provide some general background and expertise in the wine space, because he came from a financial background and didn't really have depth of knowledge in the wine space. So started working in that regard on the wine committee. And yes, as the year transpired and as the team and the business continued to grow, I was just very excited to be part of it. And then about 2 months ago, he told me that the team was looking to expand and he invited me to join full time, which I'm thrilled about.
Yeah, no, we're really excited to have you. I think when I first started, I actually called Adam and when I was considering working for Vint. So Adam actually convinced me to work for Vint, and then we kind of turned the tables later this year. But I've never actually heard, how did you get connected with Nick in the first place? Because I feel like we got to talk to Miles when we were in London, and it seems like he gets connected with these people in the most either roundabout ways or just kind of shooting out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it was actually through Kevin Sitters from Vint Connect, who was also one of the early advisors. Mm-hmm. And Kevin made the connection between Nick and Don St. Pierre, who is one of the owners of Vintfolio, which is the company that I'd worked for. Don asked me to engage with Nick to learn about the business and to provide some information. So we just had a brief call, and yeah, just really connected, and again, the Vint mission resonated, and I think at that point Nick understood or thought that I could add some value by being a part of the wine committee.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kevin is still on our wine committee, which is also, we'll have to have him on the podcast, Brady, because he's quite the interesting fellow as well. But yeah, so taking a couple steps back, then could you give us a little bit of background on your life in the world of wine and how you ended up at Vintfolio before arriving at Vint?
Sure. I basically worked in the wine business for my entire adult life, and I won't go all the way back to the beginning, but basically I've worked in a lot of different areas of the wine industry. I worked at a winery in sales, basically managing the distribution of their products across the United States. The winery that I worked at was very successful commercially, but I wouldn't put them in the top tier of quality, but it was a great proving ground for me. One, the winemaker was extremely knowledgeable, so it was a great opportunity for me to learn a lot about the science of wine and wine production. And he also was extremely generous. He had a fantastic cellar, and he would often bring bottles in for the cellar team to taste. We would do blind tasting, so it was a great way to learn about wine. And in that role, because the wines that I was struggling to sell, again, weren't really the top tier, I found that I needed to bolster my credentials in wine because I wanted to be able to talk as a peer with sommeliers and with buyers and retail. So I was introduced to the WSET program and started studying for the WSET and eventually passed different levels of those qualifications until I attained the WSET diploma. And so for those that don't know, the WSET is the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. It's more or less like the gold standard for wine education globally. Their top qualification was the diploma. So after a few years of studying and passing the different levels, I obtained the WSET diploma. And then the next thing I set my sights on was the Master of Wine qualification. When I decided to enter the Master of Wine program, I also needed to change jobs because I needed to have broad exposure to many wines from the world. So I joined an import company and worked for a national importer managing their portfolio. They worked with 36 family-owned producers, very prestigious producers around the world. Studied for the Master of Wine, eventually passed that in 2013. And after that, I transitioned to retail grocery. I worked for a large retail grocer called Lidl, which is one of the largest retailers in the world, and managed setting up their product assortment in the United States, their supply chain. Did that for a number of years, and then started with Vintfolio about 4 years ago. And Vintfolio is a company that was really focused on the collectible fine wine space. So the best wines in the world, investment grade wines. And that's really where I gained a lot of experience and knowledge in the categories of wines that we're working with at Mint.
That's cool. I really like that you kind of have run the gamut between, working in so many different sectors of the wine world, in super commercialized, I assume high volume production, all the way to, these blue chip collectibles, both consumer facing wines and like collector, high net worth individual, maybe more facing sales conversations and stuff like that too. I think that's really cool that
Right.
You have kind of been all over the place there. What was it, if you zoom out and think about which aspect of that journey was maybe the most influential in terms of the way that you view wine for yourself, not necessarily as a career, but just for yourself? Was it times that you spent speaking with winemakers? Was it in sales meetings and conversations? Was it curating collections for grocery store consumption? What has kind of shaped the way that you view the wine world the most, do you think?
Yeah, it's very difficult to point to one of those experiences as more relevant or influential than another. I think they've all been really useful in just sort of crafting my view. But I think, one of the things that was very cool in my first role at the winery was really having these sort of humble beginnings and being able to try to make wine and explain wine in a very accessible way to the average consumer, and just to be very much in touch with consumers who enjoy wine as an everyday beverage, as a way of just sort of enhancing their quality of life on a daily basis, and that's part of their life. When I worked for the importer, I think to your point, Brady, that connection to the producer was really something that resonated with me. I got to travel a lot, meet these families that have been making wine for many generations, and sort of learn that and sort of got that a different approach, that different point of view, the human element as it relates to winemaking, and also just a more global perspective around wine. With Lidl, very interesting company because it's very large, very process oriented, very commercially savvy. And so that was really useful, just sort of informing my approach commercially and as it relates to business. And then with Vintfolio, is really like, again, the top wines of the world, the global wine trade as it relates to these, just the highest quality of wines out there, and really getting access to that universe, that very exclusive network of suppliers, producers, and consumers. So all very unique, and I think all sort of crafted my general approach. I would say one of the things that I continue to strive towards is to make wines accessible for people, to communicate in a in a very plain spoken way, and to try to strip away a lot of the pretense. And that's one of the things, obviously, I love about Vint as well. It's, that this is the mission. And so that really resonates with me.
Nice. That was a really good question, Brady, by the way, before I even dive in. But that I love the accessibility point of view, because I think that your note and the humbling point as well is at the very beginning, humble beginnings. But I think, to me, I always say there's nothing more humbling than working in wine, because there's always something you don't know, a lot of things you don't know, and things like that. But I love the accessibility point as well, because like it's really hard to try to explain something and in the context of the person who needs to hear it, or like what you're trying to explain. So everybody has a different goal, and being able to explain it to the different subsets. Maybe it's like your friend who's just looking for a good bottle of wine for the weekend, or it's, all the way to people like we interact with via Vint who are saying, why is this a good investment? Being able to clearly and concisely say why something's good, and why your recommendation is good is very difficult. It's something I'm still obviously striving to myself. So I think that's a great point of yours.
Yeah, it can be. It's a very complex subject matter, as you said, Billy, and I think being able to distill that complexity into very, very clear features or as it relates to wine as investment, the rationale behind a particular collection and why we source these wines, why we think they make sense as an investment, trying to distill that down into a few very reasonable, very logical assumptions and convey that information can really be difficult, because it is such a complicated product. And, I definitely agree with you about the humbling nature of wine, because it is so complex. It's evolving. It's subjective and it's objective, and there are many points of view, and you can never really know it all. I mean, people think of masters of wine as being these encyclopedias where all of the all the knowledge around the subject is housed. But the reality is, I've forgotten a lot, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm wrong a lot. And that's part of the process of wine, I guess, education and attaining wisdom or mastery in any subject, is sort of ultimately being confronted with what you don't know, or the limitations of one individual to know everything, and being able to kind of make peace with that.
Have you? Yeah. Go ahead, Brady. All right, I was just going to say, building on the wine notes, though, transitioning myself from the quartermaster sommeliers over to the wine or the WSET kind of track, it's really interesting that the different focuses. And I only went to certified on the CMS, but with the broader focus of the WSET and kind of that more business mindset as well. Have you had times where you're talking to master somms where they're really distinct differences? Like, what, from your point of view, what do you think, once you get to the end of that track, what the differences in your knowledge base, kind of just the format of the knowledge base, might be?
Yeah, well, I think that obviously the master sommelier qualification is heavily oriented towards the restaurant business, right? Mm-hmm. So the examination is much different. It's a verbal examination. There's a restaurant component of it, service component, I mean. And so a lot of historically it's been very oriented around knowledge, but also a strong component of memorization of regions, of producers, of vineyards. And the tasting component is very oriented around identification. The Master of Wine, and again, I've done some of them. I've done the certified Master Sommelier qualification as well. So that is really the extent of my knowledge there around the program. But the MW is more around, as it relates to the written exam, certainly more around like global knowledge of wine, both in viticulture and in winemaking, and also the global business of wine. So I think the subject matter is much more broad on the theory side. And then on the tasting side, it is blind tasting. It's 3 times the number of wines for the MW exam and the MS exam. But the focus is certainly about identification to a certain extent, but also it's about understanding quality in the glass and understanding how winemaking impacts style in the glass as well. So, it's very possible to miss the identity of a wine in an MW exam, but to ultimately pass the questions asked because they're more geared towards quality or style.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I always just think about that when I see certain MSs in certain roles, and just knowing that they're, maybe it's in a business function, maybe it's in a role that may be more business forward. And to me, the more I've learned about the different programs, the more I found it interesting that I think MW or going down the WSET route positions you better for, different categories outside of the restaurant scene. It's interesting to see how people from the court can, kind of integrate into the different jobs. So thanks for that context.
Yeah, I think the MSs, obviously there are many that are successful in many different areas, but obviously the idea of a sommelier is working in the restaurant. So that is the foundation of the exam, and obviously where many of them come from as they enter the program. Whereas the MW, extremely broad. You can find MWs pretty much in every sector of the wine space, from technical winemaking to the wine trade to journalism to viticulture to all of the above. So it's MWs are like kind of permeate the industry, and maybe a bit more of a, just a bit more broadly than the MS community may.
One thing I like to think about is how do we introduce the wine industry to different types of consumers, and not only consumers, but collectors as well, and maybe investors who aren't as interested in wine. For me, it always helps to think about, maybe it's storytelling or introducing the person to an aspect of the industry that they haven't thought about before. What's kind of your entry point, or the number one thing that you would like people to know about wine that you feel like gets them hooked and starts that conversation?
Yeah. Okay. So I think very generally, one of the things that I try to convey to people and give folks confidence around is, as consumers, is ultimately trusting their preferences as it relates to what they consume. I think wine it's subjective, of course, and you can have sort of objective measures of quality, but those objective measures are ultimately determined by an individual. And I guess one of the things that I run into a lot is folks don't have confidence around their own preferences or what they like or don't like. And so I always try to, when I'm teaching people about wine or talking about tasting wine for quality, is to provide some framework for how quality can be defined in wine, but ultimately making sure that giving folks permission to like what they like, regardless of those measures of quality, right? I think that's something that just a lot of folks feel intimidated around, is sort of what they like and how other people perceive what they like. As it relates to wines as an investment, of course, obviously, I think the everyday consumer, they may not have exposure to collectible fine wines, may not even understand the potential of wine as an investment. So, really providing data around the use case of wine as an asset class that is investable is something that obviously is quite new to folks that might just pick up a bottle or two at the grocery store, and that's their exposure, right? Wine is a beverage for them. So many don't even think of it in that context. For a collector of fine wine, one of the things that I try to explain is the fact that even with collectible wines that will improve with age, there's still only a subset of those wines that I would actually consider investment grade, because investment grade, obviously for me, one of the key considerations is price appreciation over time. So if you think of the world of wine, obviously like 98% of that wine that's made is meant to be consumed young. So of that 2% that might actually improve with age, then there's even a smaller subset that actually has been proven to appreciate in value over time. And so I think with collectors, again, sort of parsing that out a little bit is something that can be useful for them.
That's really great. That's good. Those are good answers. Yeah. I mean, we certainly see, producers that mark up back vintage or library wines when they sell them, maybe directly from their winery. And that price appreciation maybe isn't the same that we're looking for as investors, right? Which that the price appreciation we want to see on the secondary market is more what we're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Just keeping more on the generally wine nerdy route, are there any regions that you've been drinking more of lately? Maybe not for investment purposes, but just going through a phase of enjoying?
Yeah, I think, well, at home, we drink a lot of sparkling wine. That's pretty much our go-to. And obviously we love champagne. So we drink champagne when we can, but we also drink, my wife loves natural wines. She loves pet nat and some of the more esoteric types of wines out there. So we've been drinking a fair amount of like pet nat from California and other places as a more affordable alternative to champagne, during the week. I also really like sparkling Vouvray, Vouvray is produced in the Loire Valley of France, and they make a sparkling wine that's made using the champagne method, but it's made using Chenin Blanc grapes. And I really love that because it's just a great value proposition as compared to champagne, but has a lot of the same characteristics. So that's kind of would be my budget sparkling bottle as well. Outside of sparkling wine, I'm a Francophile for sure, love French wines, but I really love Brunello as well. Brunello is kind of one of my go-tos. I think great value, age-worthy. It's made with Sangiovese, and just it strikes a really nice balance between like that ripe fruit that you might find in New World wines from warmer climates like California, but also has some of that complexity, earthiness, and structure that you would find in wines of Italy and France. So it strikes a nice balance for me.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. How would you compare, just for people looking at the more value sparkling in general, like a good cava that might be like 14 to 15 to 20 and compared to like a Vouvray about the same price point? Like what would you, in terms of flavor profile?
Yeah, so I don't drink a ton of cava. I find cava pretty interesting, and I think it very much depends on the producer and the bottling. Cava is made with these indigenous Spanish varieties, and as a result has a very distinctive flavor profile, which can be, I find it a bit more neutral than like a sparkling Vouvray, for example. So just a bit more neutral aromatically, and maybe a little more on the earthy side, I would say. Whereas like the sparkling Vouvray tends to have these like bruised apple notes, again, to get pretty geeky, I guess, which is a characteristic of the Chenin Blanc grape. And that to me sort of, it is reminiscent of champagne, of mature champagne that's been aged on the yeast for a long period of time. So, for me, if I'm looking for a champagne analog, I think like a sparkling Vouvray is much closer than a cava. But I've also had delicious cavas out there.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, we're running up on time here in a little bit, so we'll have to talk offline about your favorite pet nats and other natty wines, because that tends to be what we drink mostly in my household too. So cool. Well, Brady, is there any other Vint news we want to wrap up? And I will say that. I was just going to say, we'll have Adam on regularly here, guys. So we're not just cutting it short, but you'll hear plenty from Adam for updates on the wines and what we're doing on the wine stuff for Vintside soon. So
yeah, I would just say to our listeners to stay tuned as we make a few changes to the Vint website. You'll see some changes to our portfolio page and just to the website in general over this next month. And also to stay tuned for our next batch of collections that we have releasing here in June. Like I said, we should have some information out in public by the time this episode launches on Monday of next week. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Adam, for taking the time to join us today. And
welcome.
We'll see you soon. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.